They say we should have known better than to fall so deep down into this rabbit hole we found. And I was thinking,
hi, this is Nico. You're listening to my dad Rafal, also known as the White Rabbit, and James Jardine on the one and only Down the Security Rabbit Hole podcast. Buckle up and enjoy.
deep into this pool of regrettable situations. Pitch black, think back to the last time that we were
Okay, can I figure out my mute button? There we go. All right. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Welcome down the Security Rabbit Hole to yet another edition of the Down the Security Rabbit Hole podcast. I have a cast of characters. We're going to talk access control. This is probably going to be a multi-part series, so strap in. 30 minutes coming at you. All right, the usual suspects. Kitty corner for me that way. James?
How's it going today, sir?
I'm good. You properly warm down there?
I am. It's pretty nice out, actually. Summer's here.
It's 87 degrees here in Atlanta. It is 87 and crystal clear skies and crazy hot.
I would
down
tell
below
you,
me.
yesterday, or not yesterday, the day before, our pool was 87 degrees. So it was 85 last night. I didn't get in. My son was like, "You getting in?" I was like, "No, it's too cold."
Our water is at 74 degrees right now, so perfect. Then below me, Jim, welcome.
Hey, Raph. How's it going, James? It's 86 degrees and really sunny here right now, so I'm looking forward to getting outside. Good stuff.
And Jim has successfully locked his monster back in the closet behind him. For those of you that are paying attention that are running gag. All right, our guest on this episode, the guy with a studio that rivals anything I've seen in a while. Justin, welcome.
Thanks. Happy to be here.
Tell us about yourself a little bit.
I'm Justin Foster. I'm CTO at Force Scout, and I've been 25 years now in cybersecurity. Oddly enough, 25 years without a job interview. So I went from pivot, acquired by Trend Micro, spun out Decisive as a co-founder, and then acquired by Force Scout. So I'd probably be really terrible at a job interview at this point.
That's awesome that you've been able to ride that thread all the way through. All right, so I wanted to do because I saw some stuff happening. I wanted to talk on this one, just access control, right? And access control. Let's set it up. We'll use this next 30 minutes to set this up. What does access control mean modern day? I'm thinking, and I'll let you guys jump in, but I'm thinking getting in the door, getting into your equipment, getting into your applications, getting onto the network of some kind, getting access to your data. What am I missing? What's the high level? Anybody? But not all at once.
I think identification, the old school stuff, identification, authentication, authorization, and then that decides on what you get when you get in, right? And how far you can go. I mean,
that's right.
I would add to those components, but I think everything you said and then some.
I think rarely does the building control system tie ever into our normal identity access control system or cybersecurity systems. It's rare that we've seen people tie those two things together, and then you've got this big issue that people get offboarded and they still have access to the building.
Where'd you go, Justin?
I don't know.
There's that fancy setup he's got. All of a sudden went black.
And
he
now
kicked one of those buttons on that device he's got.
See, this is what happens when you get super fancy. Nice job, dude.
I think it overheated.
Oh, there you are. You're back.
Let's try that. It actually overheated. So you were talking about the weather down in Atlanta. I'm in Ottawa, Canada, which is usually like the land of igloos, right? And we're in the high 80s today. For May, that's very, very odd. So,
all right,
I'll blame it on that.
So listen, if we were to take the old boring identification, authentication, authorization.
That was me.
Yeah, that was. Listen, Jim, I'm man. We've been doing it long enough to where we know boring is what it'll keep coming back. It's just gonna keep
100%.
coming back.
Digging
Now and
ditches.
in 10 years, yep, it just keeps coming back like a bad gas station burrito. But so listen, I want to go down this route. So Justin, you mentioned that building systems. So when I worked at General Electric, we for a while had the building cards were separate from our AD, laptop access, workstation access, but that was starting to get integrated. But and let's start there. Let's go outside in. Outside of the building, you want to get in. You need to have some sort of access to get into the building, right? How is that managed today? You guys see that as through HR systems?
Usually IT, even the front desk staff often is the people, administering cards and giving out access. And in multi-tenanted buildings, sometimes you have a different badge access for the actual building than you do for your office inside it.
That's fair.
What's that
That's
connecting
entirely
to
fair.
though? Like, is that connecting to HR systems? Is that connecting into AD? Like, what's that tying into that they're building those badges off of?
There are some systems that tie into AD, but most are not. Most are just administered and, they issue a new badge and, often it's the person sitting at the front desk who prints that off for you and gives you the badge and, there's no real control after that. You're added to a group that has certain access.
I remember those days where you'd get your, on day one, somebody would walk you in, you'd get your AD credentials and your laptop, and then they'd walk you down to the security office of the multi-purpose, multi-use, multi-tenant building, and you'd have to go, show them your ID, and they would look against the system they had printed out of that day of all new employees. And a lot of access was done via printouts that were moved back and forth, right? And I'm sure it's fully integrated in digital now. But but I think that as we go outside in, right, and we talk about identification, how do you have a single ID? And how do we not have a single ID in a modern organization, modern company that isn't both physical and virtual access?
You think you could have like a smart card of some sort, right? That works the badge readers, but also unlocks your PC and is basically like your YubiKey type of device, right? That handles everything.
If only such technology existed. No way.
Cat card.
Yeah.
It requires a lot of infrastructure. You can build them. It's doable, right? But it takes a lot of investment. You have to be committed to do something like that. But the technology completely exists. It's just, again, we're dealing with environments that are having difficult time patching, 3-year-old vulnerabilities kind of thing, right?
Yeah, fair enough. But the alternative is, and this is going back maybe 15 years. I did some security advisory for a friend's company. Really large company, was in the news at one point for this thing that happened to them. But their building access was completely independent of anything IT had, and their onboarding was literally the HR manager, the HR business partner, and the manager would send a copy of an email to the manager, and then copy the building's front desk, and they would say, okay, this new user is now authorized to access the building, and here are the profiles, like server rooms, 7th floor, 12th floor, cafeteria, whatever. And then the challenge, which was fine, right? That I mean, okay, not super secure, but it's better than paper, I suppose. The downside was when they did cleanup after somebody was offboarded in their company's HR, they had a roughly 30-day window during which they would batch decommission badges. And so if I get fired today, I've got at most 30 days of unfettered access to the spaces. Do you think that still happens today?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right?
All the time. Yeah. At my old company, we used to get an email saying, "What's the last 4 digits of your card?" Well, you should know that probably. Why are you asking me? Right? It's interesting though. Even if you tie everything together, you've got an opposite problem. What if you have a breach, your identity system gets compromised, right? Like in the case of MGM. Now all of a sudden your key card for your room is not working in the elevator. So you got to climb the stairs up the flights. What if you're compromised, your identity system is compromised, and you're all rushing into the SOC, your incident response team, your security analysts, people, and they can't access the building. That's an interesting, converse.
That is a problem. So there's a case to be made for having them separate, but I think there's a case to be made for having them together.
I think you soft link them, right? You have the idea of, is this still a decent identity, and maybe a batch every day cleaning up, the cards that shouldn't have access anymore. But if it's have the latency, trying to get in the building of going to the AD server and checking your current status, that might not be a good idea.
Yeah, so 24 hours sounds like a reasonable window. And so the next step outside in then is your traditional, IAM, right? Identity Access Management protocols, which is, okay, who are you? When you're which department do you work in? Can you act, are you still valid to log into the network, into your laptop? Do you have access to email and all that? And I think, I'd like to think that we've largely, if not optimized it, at least figured out how that's supposed to work. Tying AD to cloud identity, to to multiple clouds, to custom SaaS applications. Like, we've created that middle layer that does all the routing and translating for us. And I'm not saying that it's fantastic, but I've got a pretty good single sign-on, God help me, portal at work, and it, like 80% of the time, it works like 90% of the time. But I think there's room to improve there. What's the state of the art in that? Anybody know?
I don't know too, Graf. I mean, are you just looking at it from the ability to log in?
Yeah.
Because when we talk about access management in general, right? Like, it's the onboarding of new accounts, managing all the accounts and all the different access permissions you have, removing your accounts. Like, I think the ability, what you're saying of being able to log in, is fairly stable. Now, I think if you were to go into organizations and say, hey, can you tell me how many administrators you have, or what groups this user has access to, that's a whole different story. I mean, I venture to say that just like the badge access where you have 30 days before your account disables, imagine how many AD accounts out there work that exact same way, that when you get terminated today, your account actually is still live until some batch runs, up to 30 days away.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if we're going outside in, right? So you get in the door, you sit down, and you're able to log into the laptop. Cool. You can access email. Cool. And then there's all the other services that are just beyond what your machine physical device gives you access to, right? You've got those people that work from home. So secure access, SASE, SSE, Zero, ZTNA, whatever, choose your flavor. So you've got all that. You've got third-party applications. You've got all sorts of different internal data access. And so when I think of access control, I'm thinking, is there a way, or how do? Well, I guess philosophically, do we want to? Because Justin, you brought that up. Do we want to? And then, if we do, how, to what level, and then can we do it? To take your identity, like to who I am, what I'm, how I'm proving to some machine that I am who I am. Sounds like a Popeye the Sailor Man. I'm about to break into cartoons here, but I am me. You verify me. Now tell me what I have access to and at what granular level. That is getting. I feel like every time we get closer to the existing tech that we have. So what when we had everybody went home, I felt like right before that we were getting a pretty good handle on getting people in the office, relatively good access and clean up old access and stuff. And then we sent everybody home because COVID happened and all sorts of things went wrong. And that blew up on us in catastrophic ways, right? Suddenly you're like, well, you have your machine at home. Sure, you can have access to, throw the VPN client on there. You'll be just fine. And I feel like that version of things has made knowing who's on our network, whether they should be on there, and what they're actually doing very difficult from a defender's perspective. You guys are quiet today.
I think it's Jim's turn.
No, I was afraid I was going to talk over you, Justin. I've already been babbling too much. I think the thing is, well, I'm going to say I 100% agree with you. Is I actually agree we were getting close. I think that was that beginning element around conditional type of access controls, which is like the first step into getting to having more information available to you to make certain access decisions other than just an identity. Like you're on the right computer, you're in the right network, you're not in, Timbuktu when you're logging in, and that kind of stuff. So I 100% agree with you. We were getting very, very close, and I do believe there was a little bit of a stall. And then we shifted our sort of general view of the world into not just access, but just like, how do I get you access from home? Right. So the birth of SASE, all the kind of stuff that you mentioned earlier, and it's kind of distracted from that. And I think there's movements going in that space, but then add to that new distractions, and I'm not saying they're negative, but things like password lists and and the use of YubiKeys and FIDO and stuff like that, which is still the first part, right? It's still just that first part of that initial access. So we haven't really talked about access control, and then ultimately where James is going is the management of all of this mess in the back end.
COVID was a major deperimeterization event, right? Like it caused us all to deal with SASE and not having your network IPS, IDS, not having your layers of firewall in front of you, trusting the devices out in the wild, work from anywhere and such, right? But you still have these situations where, hospitals can't go work from home. The doctors doing surgery can't go work from home. Manufacturing stayed on-prem. Banks still had to have, the ability to withdraw cash and people come in and cash their checks. And what we've ended up with is this hybrid environment because, yes, SASE and an agent works great for a laptop at a Starbucks or at a home. But now the amount of unmanaged devices on corporate networks exceeds the amount of managed devices. And so what do you do for them? You can't install an agent. You can't treat them as a, no network is the best network type approach. That really only works for IT, not OT, not SCADA, not building automation, not gas distribution and generation, not, There's so many industries where that ideal is just not possible. So then you talk about NAC, right? You talk about network access control and either pre-connect or post-connect, and they both have a place. But what we found, in my 2 years now at Forescout, is most people do the post-connect because you can evaluate who that is, what that device is, who's logged into it. Does it have the right patch? Does it have the right AV running or EDR running? Does it have, malicious software installed on it? The pre-connect state, just like the identity problem, it's limited information, right? We can't really prove you're you. Second factor, somebody stole your phone, unlocked it with your finger or your face. The same thing applies to networks. If you're just doing 802.1x or radius, right? All you get is kind of the Mac operating system, basic details. So what we found is most people prefer to let it connect and then assess it and then shut it down if it's not approved in the organization. So that works for OT as well, right? Is this, a Siemens PLC controller that I'm expecting on the network? Or is this all of a sudden, a Tesla or an Xbox connecting into my gas distribution network? Probably don't want that, right? So,
or the bad guy's Raspberry Pi.
It changed a whole, the remote work. I think the biggest change that did was added that complexity now of the device itself, right? Like we think of the access control. Typically, if we were all in the office, the access control is more around, am I who I say I am? Because we've got NAC and we've got other stuff that, locks down what connects. Now it's like, hey, I can say who I am, but I'm connecting either from my personal iPad or I'm connecting from the work laptop or I'm connecting from this. Now I got to look at not only do I give access to the person, like I'm an authorized user, but do I give access to the person on that device? And that's an interesting piece that kind of came out where I don't think we had to worry about that as much, when we were all in the office, because we kind of trust those were all managed devices. We trusted the devices that were on there. There were ways to kind of get around that, like unplug the printer and you can go use their port and get on, right? Like little things like that. But I mean, in general, right, it was less about, do I trust this device, and more, do I trust the person that's using the device?
Guys, what happened to, remember in the early 2000s, we had these work from anywhere on any device type of initiatives, right? The BYO, bring your own device, all that. Did we give up on that, or is that still a thing? I don't know if I know that answer.
I mean, there's pockets of VDI. Like one really good example is nurse workstations. It's a great place to have your desktop, have all your icons, but you're moving from desktop to desktop, thin client to thin client. But I'm seeing way less of that premise anymore, and way more of just, we're adapting to each of your device types. I'm doing certain work on my phone, certain work on my iPad. Maybe I'm using an Intune or something similar to keep to corporate policy. It's sandboxed itself, so I can't see what else I'm doing on the iPad. And then, your IT devices, you're able to control those with decent EDR technologies, decent, software management technologies, updates. Yeah, I think it's gotten a lot better, and there's so much more flexibility you have now, but you have to be accepting of an environment that's, we used to call it BYOD, right? Yeah. There's no way you're telling the CEO you can't bring your iPad and connect it to your corporate network. No, there's just no way. They're going to override that in an instant, right?
I don't think we gave up on it. I just think it became a situation where people are going to bring their own devices and you deal with it. And to like the CEO example Justin gave, and remember when still today you get a phone with multiple SIM cards if necessary, and then there's MDM that puts layers of applications inside your devices in an attempt to get control. And then you're like, okay, well, if you want to bring your own device, you need to install X, Y, or Z, or you need to be able to have control over it and join our domain or whatever you want to say. And then you're just like, well, are you monitoring my phone calls and my text messages? And so you spend more time trying to express, we're not trying to monitor you. And so you it becomes more cultural in that sense, where in the beginning, I think, Raph, it was more about expense and stuff like that, right? And creating more flexibility. Now it's kind of morphed a little bit, I think, to where you don't even talk about it because it's implied I can bring my own device. What do you mean I can't get my email on my iPhone, right?
It's it. Yeah. Some of that too, I think, Jim, was to get rid of the whole having to carry 5 phones. Like everybody, I'm not carrying both of these phones around, so it's like, all right, well, I'll let you put it on here. I remember everybody always do that. They I still have a neighbor that sets 2 phones down on the table if she comes over for dinner, right? She's got one for work and one for personal. And we've got great technology to be able to split those out. Like, hey, everything sits on that profile, like it is separated. Because I'll tell you, like my work stuff, I don't put on my personal phone. If I'm not on my computer, I'm not there. Text me. But, there's other reasons. We do separate profiles. We have all that set up. And it's like, you can erase that. I mean, people's phones are their lives now, right? That's my authenticator. That's my everything. I can't lose that. And I certainly can't lose it if for some reason some legal case comes out and they don't just say, we want that profile, we want that device. So I keep mine separate. No thanks. I'm not handing it over. But, I think a lot of that was that too, right? Like it's like just put it into one thing. I think it depends to the company that you're at. I think some companies still, especially older companies, probably lock down that ability to bring your own device more than, some of the more startups, some of the more hip companies that are out there. And I think a lot of places still lock it down as to, we'll let you BYOD as far as like phone, but not like my main workstation is a managed device. I don't get to bring and say, I'm going to use Linux today and, start connecting up and work. I'd be curious to see how many places are that lenient versus like a mobile device, like, oh, on my iPad or something. It's not my main.
We've been trying to balance, so this is a good start to this access control conversation, because we've been trying to balance access, usability, and security for forever. And this sort of feels like you can have, some of those, but not all of those. Security is probably the hardest one to build in because, much like in other theaters. But when you think about Justin, you take your example of your OT devices, right? There, you can't put an agent on it. So you're just going to have to trust that it is what it's what it says it is. Yes, you can put it on a separate network and say, okay, OT stuff, you talk on this OT network I have. However, a new OT device shows up. Maybe it's a Raspberry Pi. Maybe it's an HMI. You don't know, right? You have to like physically go interrogate it, or I mean, it's gotten really, I wouldn't say easy, but almost trivial to clone an entire OT device using a Raspberry Pi with a little coding, right?
You actually have to be really careful interrogating OT devices because most of them have really old, weak TCP/IP stacks.
Yeah, fair
and just
enough.
by running, like you run a basic Nmap scan on that, you'll take down a solar farm, you'll take down windmills, you'll take down biomed devices are unfortunately notorious.
All
for
of
this
those
sort of
things I have been witness to. One of those things I have caused.
We have a lab in Eindhoven, and we have a ton of medical devices, OT devices, SCADA systems, building control. A lot of the medical devices that are still distributed are still Windows XP under the covers. And it's just, you run an Nmap and you take them down. So we took a different approach of saying we have to know what this device is and patch level, and we could talk about SBOM but we look at the protocols. We unpack 250 protocols to look at those OT devices and say, what is it doing? What's it talking to? Is it talking beyond the Purdue levels that it should be? Without that kind of introspection, you really can't touch those devices and know. And then you got things like I can't patch them, or those recalls, I can't issue those. Or we have devices that we've acquired where they glued the USB port for security, right? So that means it's unpatchable forever now. And these are like automation systems. These are things at football stadiums that open and close the louvres to let in fresh air, and you now can use that as an attack point because behind the snack stand there's an Ethernet port you just plug in, and all of a sudden you're talking to the HVAC system. It's real. Like this stuff is real. Right?
I know we
tough.
tell stories, but this stuff is absolutely real. I can't imagine being on, and we've got some incredible arenas and stadiums here in the States, and obviously you guys do in Canada as well. But I was at one recently, and almost everything is wireless now, except for all those older devices, which have literally there's a switch up in the rafters and a bunch of Ethernet cables going from it. And I'm just thinking to myself, I wonder what happened if I just plugged into one of those. Like, what kind of access do you get? What can you do? Yeah. It's pretty impressive how open and accessible these networks are. But access at the fundamental level, access control is about allowing an entity, because it's not just people now, it's APIs and machines, an entity to have the least amount of access that it needs to perform a job, right? A function. And as simple as that sounds, it is staggeringly difficult when you think about all the different dimensions, from physical access to down all the way down to, is this API allowed to make this call and request this bit of data? And we haven't touched that yet. But all right, so this is why I wanted to. We're going to start keeping these episodes so manageable, 30 minutes. But if you guys are up for it, I want to take this a level down next time, and really kind of go into the different types and versions and opportunities we have. But this is a good starting conversation anyway. I think it. Yes, you guys, everybody's mentioned at least one thing during this last 30 minutes. I was like, oh yeah, I forgot about that. Well, that was fun.
Yeah, we're barely starting to scratch the surface, Raf. There's a lot more to come. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the weird part is, well, this could be a 6-hour conversation and we're not anywhere near a complete. Justin, hopefully you get to join us next time, but from your perspective, on the whole, if you take your time machine back a decade and look around and you come back today and say, all right, state of things, better or worse?
I think way better. It's funny, you and I go way, way, way back, right? The original couple hundred people on Twitter. right? The security Twitters, the B-sides, the remember bloggers meetup at RSA, all that kind of stuff, right? And back at the time, it was still like firewall and AV. Yay.
Yeah, that was it.
Right? And we've added all these technologies, so it's gotten much more complex, but it has gotten better. Like you mentioned single sign-on. My Okta portal is everything now. And at Trend Micro, I had 20 different passwords. I kept them in a password manager, right? But it was 20 different passwords. I bet you some of them still work. The marketing portal. Who's going and policing the marketing portal to make sure I can't download, PowerPoints anymore? It's just not a thing. So I think things have gotten better, and organizations have more tools to make things better. We're off air, right?
Nope, not yet. Still recording. So you're welcome to tell us a juicy story.
I'll pretend that wasn't Trend Micro then. Maybe that was someone else.
I think it's a good point though, Justin. Like the more we're getting better at spreading out, covering things, the more the spread is getting. Like we're getting more SaaS offerings, we're getting more things that we don't manage directly. Until we get to that point where we embed SSO into that stuff. So it's like, okay, I'm gonna implement with this. We're doing SSO only. If you don't support it, we're not doing it, because I want it that when I remove that employee, that's gonna sound really bad. When I remove that employee from my AD, it removes you from everything we've got access to, right? And now we don't have that. Like now it's like, okay, it gets these 5 systems, but these 80, we have to go in and manually go in and administer those users.
That's really important. And Raf, you said it well. Like you're going from layers, the physical authentication systems and access systems. Then we're talking about network and identity. That's really people-based, people plugging in machines. When you get down to the machine-to-machine access, right? That's where things get really, really interesting is you don't have those same offboarding principles. How do you refresh credentials? How do you make sure one system connecting to another API is doing so in a secure way and is offboarded when that's no longer appropriate? Okta and single sign-ons like that really help us with the identity the people accessing systems or people accessing SaaS or even on-prem software that supports SAML or SSO. But when you get into that machine-to-machine, it gets a lot more hairy, right? Because everybody's doing it in a slightly different way. And then when you get to the OT side, it's kind of the Wild West. A lot of those protocols are still completely unsecure, completely clear text, right? So network segmentation is the only thing that you can really do. But a lot of people can't afford to have 6 parallel networks in their hospital or their energy production system, right? It's just too much to burden to bear. And there is layers that have to go between those. Do you go the microsegmentation route? That's hard too, because that's really more of an IT-based approach, not an OT-based approach. So, there are so many layers to access control that it gets complex.
Yeah, well, this is going to be a great topic to pull on for next time. Thanks, you guys. This has been a lot of fun. Justin, I hope you'll come back and do this again. Jim, as always, say hi to the monster in your closet. And James, try not to melt in the pool.
Yeah.
So for the Down to Security Rabbit Hole podcast, this is Raph signing us off. We'll see you on the next episode. And cue the music. This is where we get off the bus.